Patreon off. Now Patreon. Hi, everybody at patreon.com/music is not a genre. Thank you for being a supporter. This is the Bonus MxTRA for Season 8, Episode 7. If you're not on patreon.com/music is not a genre, you're getting this for free because I want you to know what's there. And this is probably going to end up being one of my favorite Bonus MxTRAs of the season. And as promised, what is it? It's in relation to part 2 of my series on the great producers, which dealt with the 1960s. And this is on the 5 archetypes of producer, 5 producer archetypes, which were all birthed either before or during the 1960s. By the 1960s, all 5 producer archetypes that we have now existed already. And that's why it's the Bonus MxTRA for this particular episode. So while I'm doing this, I'm listening to my dog. I'm home alone, and I'm listening to my dog climb up the stairs on her own to probably sleep on my bed. So, you know, you've met Olga before. If you've been hanging out with me for a couple of seasons, she has made an appearance, not physically, but in terms of her effect on the recording. And she's kind of affecting me a little bit right now. But to get back to this, the idea here is to illustrate how the title producer can mean a lot of things. And like I said in the main episode, the fluidity of music roles in general often makes it difficult to know who contributed what. But that said, this hierarchy is a good way to at least partially answer the who did what question, because from a greater to a lesser extent, in order, these archetypes indicate how much any given producer contributed to the final sound of the music. And what I mean by that is I'm going to start with 1 through 5, and the 1 is the archetype where the producer contributes to the nth degree. Really influences the music as much as possible. And number 5 would be as little as possible. And it's very gradual and sequential, meant to be. So let's do it. Number 1, which I'm calling the auteur or architect. They oversee or dictate nearly every aspect of the music, from songwriting and arrangement to mixing, and even often image or concept. That is what an auteur does. They are visionary, they're detail obsessed. They are often also the main creative force, like artist producers, or producers who create an artist out of other musicians, but really are the driving force behind it, which is a pretty common thing even to this day. I just had a talk with my friend Steve Erickson, who's going to be on this show in a couple of months again, been on several times, about how there's this band, I believe they're called Dogma, I don't know, nobody knows who they are, and they're basically cobbled together by some producer, etc. So it's still happening today. This kind of producer treats artists as interpreters of their vision, whether it's themselves or other musicians. Very common in pop, electronics, and they're common everywhere. Examples from the 1960s, Brian Wilson, Phil Spector, Joe Meek, they were all auteurs. Examples from other decades, Trevor Horn, Kanye, Max Martin, Prince, hugely. It's like imagine the director of a film. The artist performs, but the producer shapes the world. That's the first archetype. The second archetype, the collaborator, co-creator. So it works with the artist as an equal partner, shaping the sound and arrangement and performance while still respecting the artist's identity. So that artist has an identity they come to the table with, but says, or there's an agreement that the producer is an equal partner in creating this music. They merge the artist's personality with their own stylistic fingerprints. And you hear this, like, for example, and I'll get to more examples, but when you think of the Beatles, you're like, okay, well, they were the Beatles, but they wouldn't be the Beatles we know without George Martin. Often plays instruments, often co-writes when needed, balances artistry and commercial polish. So some examples, 1960s, George Martin, as mentioned, Tom Wilson, who worked with Dylan and Simon and Garfunkel and the Velvet Underground, Glyn Johns, and Lou Adler, who I did mention in the main episode. Some other examples I'll say not 1960s, but this guy straddles so many decades. It's Quincy Jones. Absolutely. Has a vision, but works with the artist. Other decades, Danger Mouse, Nigel Godrich, Phineas from Billie Eilish fame. It's like a creative partner or band member who makes the artist's ideas sound bigger and more focused. Third archetype is the beat maker or track producer. So creates the instrumental or sonic foundation that artists write or perform over. They often originate the musical idea, sometimes via samples, loops, or electronic production, but also live instruments, sometimes overlapping with the songwriter. Now, when you think of, and this is the way when I looked it up, the source I used said the same thing. You think of beat maker, I'm making beats. That's a common thing. It's been common for a couple of decades now, but you think of hip hop and certain kinds of pop, etc. That kind of amalgam pop. I know for a fact that this archetype existed in the 60s. How? Because Berry Gordy and Holland Dozier Holland used the Funk Brothers, that house band, to create music beds with live instruments that would then be used for more than one song. Or not even knowing what the song was going to be, what would the lyrics or melody be, who would even the performer be, but create that music bed first. Smokey did it. The Wrecking Crew did it. Norman Whitfield, also at Motown. A lot of early Motown and other factory companies that used the same session musicians, because many of those recordings were then assigned again to a songwriter, an artist, and or used more than once for different songs. Blew my mind. Other decade examples: Jay Dilla, Pharrell Williams, Metro Boomin, Timbaland. So it's like a painter who provides the canvas and the color palette for the vocalist, lets the vocalist and the artist tell the story. Provides the world, they tell the story. Fourth archetype, the coach facilitator. Steps back, lets the artist lead, intervenes mainly to guide, refine, help the artist realize their potential, but doesn't get too super involved. Very psychological, very intuitive. A coach, which I'll talk a little bit about how that applies to me and some other things in a bit. Prioritizes vibe, authenticity, and emotion over technical perfection. Often minimal in arrangement, but maximal in emotional support. So some examples from the 1960s, Jerry Wexler, especially with Aretha Franklin, Andrew Loog Oldham with the Rolling Stones. Examples from other decades, the big one is Rick Rubin. I mean, when I think of like a coach, facilitator type, I think of Rick Rubin. Similar to how they say Clint Eastwood directs, just kind of sits back and only, intervenes when necessary. To greater or lesser, effect. Sometimes I like what Rick Rubin does and Clint Eastwood, and sometimes I don't. But I like the vibe of this kind of producer. I don't know what my favorite is. I'm not even sure. T-Bone Burnett, another example, and Daniel Lanois, like with the U2 and all of that. It's kind of like a performance coach, which again, I'll talk about a little bit in a minute, or Zen master who clears the path for the artist to find their truth. And the fifth and final archetype for producer is called the engineer or technician. Focusing on the sound itself, the acoustics, the recording quality, the mic placement, the mixing, things that are overlooked by people who just listen to music, but when you're producing music, you understand how important they are, and they do affect the overall sound of the music, the final product. Often less involved in creative direction, however. They're more in the sonic execution. They're expert in translating artistic ideas into pristine soundscapes. Common in everywhere. Again, I don't like when certain notes say that one producer is common in one type of music than another. I don't think that's true. Some examples from the 1960s, Jeff Emmerich. Tom Dowd, that studio pioneer who helped popularize the 8-track and console design changes and things like that. Eddie Kramer, who I will probably mention in the 1970s episode. Some other examples from other decades. Alan Parsons was an amazing engineer. Steve Albini. It's kind of like a cinematographer responsible for how everything looks or sounds, but not necessarily what's happening creatively. So again, riding on that fluidity idea, it's safe to say that many, if not most producers, fall into several of these categories, sometimes with the same artist, sometimes on the same album. So you have these hybrid evolving roles. For example, George Martin was a collaborator, often an engineer, mostly a collaborator, often an engineer, but occasionally an auteur. Rick Rubin, mostly a coach, philosopher, but occasionally has had auteur tendencies. You know, Beastie Boys would be kind of an example of that. Phineas is a co-creator, but also a beat maker and also the engineer. And I understand these hybrids because I've been all 5 of these to some extent. So let's go in reverse order what my experience has been, because I think it helps illustrate these things. And one is, have I been an engineer in tech? I've done so much of it, I don't know what else I am at this point. For example, somebody comes in to record with me and all. My entire job is just to run the board, run the system, and make sure it goes well, it's captured well. I might say something, and I have said things like, you want to do a 3rd take? Let's do 4 takes. In my head, I'm thinking, let's make sure we have everything, and maybe they can do this certain line of a certain part better. But I'm not really guiding the creative part of it. Coach, facilitator, number 4. Well, why did I say I would mention this again? Because my song coach service, nickdimatteo.com/thesongcoach, that's what I do. I guide people with their material. I let them be the artist, and I just weigh in philosophically, psychologically, with my instinct, with my experience, only making creative decisions when they ask me to, or when I can see that they're lost, or there's something they're doing where there's a question in there and they don't even know they have that question. I'm as supportive as I am as an engineer, but a little more hands-on. Have I been a beat maker and track producer? Not as much. I have done it, but most of what I made has either been with another artist or for me. But there have been times when I've collaborated with a couple of other artists and provided them with backing tracks, or made a track for myself that I had no idea what it was going to be for, and then years later use it for a song. That was making beats. Number 2, collaborator, co-creator. So when I had a production partner, this is how we worked. We collaborated on the sound of Rex music. And anytime I've worked with any other outside producer, this is always how I've worked, because I'm always hands-on with my production. So every project I have put out has either been produced by me or co-produced by me and some other wonderful person. And finally, auteur architect, that is me. I don't want to do everything. I've graduated to doing everything for various reasons, some economic, some because I like to control those things and I know better. I've learned working with other producers that I often know better what a song needs because I understand the song from the gut level, from the existential level. But I also, and friends of mine have said this, a guy who's an amazing songwriter, Jed Becker, said this to me, that I love production and the studio as much as I do the song creation. And he doesn't. And he's right, I do. So this entire bonus should show 3 things. One is producers can work effectively in many ways. There is no one way a producer works well. And that's why number 2, most producers are some or all of these archetypes. But 3, the best producers know how to pivot from one to another to get the best results from their artists. Even if the artist is themselves, you have to know how to pivot through all 5 of these archetypes, which again, to sum up, just so we remember what those archetypes are, if I can scroll back in my notes, the greatest hands-on, the auteur or architect. Next level, collaborator or co-creator. Next one, beat maker, track producer. Next one, coach, facilitator. Again, you want me as your coach at nickdimatteo.com/thesongcoach. I love doing that. And everyone I've worked with has enjoyed it as well. And 5, the engineer or technician, the most hands-off, but still significant. Thank you for hanging with me for this bonus MXtra, everybody, wherever you are. Thank you for your support if you are on Patreon. And if not, patreon.com/music is not a genre. And I will talk to you next week.